This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Our guest, Jeremy Scahill, author of Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. And I want to get to talking about Blackwater. Well, it's now called ZXE. We're also joined by President Reagan's former Assistant Secretary of Defense. He is now with the Center for American Progress. He's written a piece called The Promised Withdrawal from Iraq. Lawrence Korb, the last point that Jeremy made about President Obama, well, he called President Bush right before he gave his Camp Lejeune speech, and then telling the troops at Camp Lejeune that they had succeeded in their mission in removing Saddam Hussein.
Well, I think that's very important because the troops did what they were told. I agree that the war was fought under false pretenses. We should never have gone there. It was probably the greatest strategic blunder in U.S. history, but that's not the fault of the troops. They were sent there. Their mission was overthrow the regime, and that's that's what they did. We can't fault them, however much we want to be opposed to this war. The other point he made is certainly true that there are potential for abuses. I have enough confidence in Senator Obama and that he will not let that happen. But yes, there certainly is the potential for us to make some of the mistakes we've made in previous history when we didn't like the results of the election. But I think it is important, and I did like that part because as a young man, I went and got involved in another terrible war. But the people I went with in Vietnam, we did what we were told. Then when you come back and you find out, for example, that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was a sham, that's not our fault. And that's what I was glad that he did that because it is true that these people have suffered. Not only the Iraqis, but our men and women have been asked to do something that no other military in our history has been asked to do, to go back 2, 3, 4 times into a combat zone with very little, time in between. And what it has done to them and their families, I think, is something that we're going to be paying for a long time.
Jeremy Scahill.
Part of the problem here, though, it's not about faulting the troops. I mean, I agree with Lawrence in the sense that troops are given orders and then they can decide whether they're going to follow out those orders or not follow them out. We've seen many soldiers through IVAW, Iraq Veterans Against the War, and others who have actually resisted or have refused to participate in a war they consider to be illegal or immoral. And that though, is separate from what President Obama did. What President Obama did is he completely reformed his position on Iraq, co-signed the lies of the Bush administration, and cast aside his campaign rhetoric where he did talk about this being a fraudulent war, where he did criticize the prosecution of this war. To listen to President Obama at Camp Lejeune, you would think that that this war was prosecuted beautifully, and that the point of it was to liberate the people of Iraq. That was not the point of this administration, of the Bush administration's occupation of Iraq. That came like 2 or 3 justifications later after the fraud and the lies. So the fact that Obama gives this speech does not mention the fact that Iraqis have suffered under the U.S. occupation, doesn't mention the incredible price that the Iraqis have paid as a result of U.S. military action in Iraq. To me, I think that sends a very disturbing message to the Iraqi people and the region more generally.
Jeremy Scahill, I wanted to ask about the response of the Democratic leaders to President Obama's speech, like Nancy Pelosi, like Harry Reid. First of all,
yeah, you look at Obama's top allies. It's people like John McCain. It's people like Mitch McConnell, who praised Obama for implementing the Bush administration's Iraq strategy at the end. And I mean, some of this is partisan politics. And please, the Republicans have no credibility on this. I mean, if we can be critical of Barack Obama, I mean, the Republicans are just merciless criminals when it comes to U.S. policy in Iraq and toward the world more broadly. But the fact that Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer all acted like astonished that there's going to be 35,000 to 50,000 troops and a residual capacity in Iraq, and we're criticizing this. I mean, this is a classic example of what's wrong with the Democratic Party when it comes to foreign policy, and what's been wrong with this party for a long time. And that is that when it actually mattered, when Pelosi or Reid could have said to candidate Obama, back off that residual force, as many activists were calling for, they were deafeningly silent. We were at the Democratic convention, Amy, walking around trying to find anyone to criticize that aspect of the Obama policy, and not even anti-war Democrats who were firmly against the war from the beginning would dissent from the policy positions of the dear leader. This is cult activity when you refuse to go after someone to try to criticize their policies when it matters and then later act like you've been hoodwinked. They knew exactly what was going on.
Lawrence Korb.
Well, I think in the speech, as I read it, he did make reference to the suffering of the Iraqi people and talked about, you know, the refugee problem. So I think he did that. But again, I think Jeremy's right. I mean, you got to go back. Obama mentioned this in the campaign. So if people are upset, they should have, you know, made these views known, you know, during the primaries. And again, well, I thought the war was the greatest strategic disaster. Remember that the Congress voted to approve this, including some of the other people who ran against Obama. And I think they, you know, they should be held accountable for this as well. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around. The question is, okay, we are where we are. Are we, you know, doing the right thing? And I just hope that the president carries out what he says and we're completely out of there, no permanent bases, and that he does not allow Americans to participate in any type of operations that are done solely to deal with one ethnic group being concerned about what the other is doing.
Well, let's go from the issue of whether there are permanent bases, which he did not address, to another issue he didn't address, mercenaries or the paramilitaries, the private contractors. I had a chance to question Senator Obama a year ago when he was on the campaign trail. He spoke at Cooper Union here in New York. As he was walking out, I asked him why he wasn't calling for a total withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq in accordance with the 70% of Iraqis who say they want the U.S. out. Senator Obama, quick question. 70% of Iraqis say they want the U.S. to withdraw completely. Why don't you call for a total withdrawal?
Well, I do, except for our embassy. I call for embassy and protecting our civilian contractors.
You've said a residual force, which would be 10,000.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think that you've read exactly what I've said. What I said is that we do need to have a strike force in the region. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Iraq. It could be in Kuwait or other places. But we do have to have some presence in order to not only protect them, but also potentially protect their territorial integrity.
Call for a ban on the private military contractors like Blackwater?
I'm the one who sponsored the bill that called for the investigation of Blackwater and those folks.
But would you support the Sanders one now?
Well done. Here's the problem. We have 140,000 private contractors right there. So unless we want to replace all of or a big chunk of those with U.S. troops, we can't draw down the contractors faster than we can draw down our troops. So what I want to do is I want them out in the same way that we make sure that we draw out our own combat troops. All right? I don't want to replace those contractors with more U.S. troops because we don't have them. All right? But this was a speech about the economy.
The war is costing $3 trillion, according to Stiglitz.
Which I made a speech about last week.
That's Senator Barack Obama a year ago at Cooper Union here in New York. Lawrence Korb, I know you have to leave for another appointment, but I did want to ask about the mercenaries, about these the private contractors. They number, what, about the same as the U.S. soldiers right now in Iraq?
That's correct. But again, as you draw down the troops, you'll need less of them because one of the things that they're doing is providing logistic support for the for the troops, and you will need obviously less of that. Remember, under the status of forces agreement, they no longer have immunity. If these people act up again, they are going to be subject to the Iraqi justice system, and obviously they're going to need some sort of private contractors to guard the number of personnel that are in the country in this embassy. And again, I would not have built such a big embassy, but it is there, and hopefully over the years we can get that back to a normal size if we ever get back to having a normal relationship with Iraq.
Well, Lawrence Korb, I want to thank you for being with us from the Center for American Progress, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Reagan. And Jeremy Scahill, if you would just stay with us for a few more minutes. I want to stay on this issue of the private contractors.
Can I say something about this issue first? I mean, on the issue of the U.S. Embassy, I think that the Obama administration should turn it over to the Iraqi people and let them decide what they want to use that massive city within their city for. And the fact is,
we're talking about like a 4-mile square area in downtown Baghdad.
Yeah, you're talking about a small small city unto itself that's going to have 1,200 employees, and hundreds of CIA operatives was the initial plan for it. And all these people are going to necessitate deadly and lethal security. So that would be a real message of change to send to the Iraqi people, to say this was an embassy built on slave labor as part of an illegal occupation of your country, because there were people that were brought in. It was essentially indentured servitude. There were people that were brought in from other countries that worked on the construction of that project, much like Africans abducted from the African continent and brought here as slaves. They and their descendants were building the White House in this country. Here we are years later with the U.S. government having the embassy built largely on labor that was forced labor or dramatic